afternoon. Can you hear me? I was wondering who he was talking about. Well, I must not be the next speaker, right? Really difficult build-up. Right? So I'm going to talk about rethinking this startup. Why would anyone in their right mind want to start their own company? And if you want to start it, you're not in your right mind, maybe you shouldn't be to do it, right? And what are the things that are important? And I've come up with 5 things that we're going to talk through, right? Because it's not just what are the things that make it interesting, it's also have you got what it takes to succeed, and those things intertwine together. But I'm going to put up a quick definition first of the word business, because I want to come back to this. Entrepreneurship and startups are cool right now. It's trendy, right? It's rock star stuff. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's still about business fundamentals. Providing, manufacturing something for a profit. Yeah? And I come back to that a lot, so I put the definition up. So I've come up with 5 things. Why 5? 7 was what it was written for. 7 is kind of a cool number, but I only have 18 minutes, and the clock hasn't even started. So I've brought it back to 5. And hey, I'm Irish, so we struggle with the space-time continuum. We're not good with time, right? We're kind of like Catalans in Spanish. We see time more as a general guideline, as opposed to it's not really a specific unit of measure, right? So I brought it back to 5 to help me get through this, right? But it doesn't matter, because I'm going to sneak the two other points in, or sneak or snuck. I'm not sure what's the right English. I'll sneak in. Snuck actually sounds like a startup, doesn't it? Because today there's so many cool names for Feargal and Feargal and who knows what they do. Right? And actually in the audience you can probably check on your iPad. Snuck, maybe Snuck.com is a company, I don't know, right? Oh, it's a social network for sneakers, right? I don't know, right? But I'm going to try and get through a number of points and bring them in, right? I think we are all frustrated entrepreneurs. I think everybody wants to do it to a degree. I used to dream of it. As a kid, my mother has this letter. It's wonderful. At 9 years old, I was sent to a summer school for 3 weeks, which is pretty cruel in hindsight, right? But the letter I sent home as a 9-year-old opens with, "I'm making extra money selling cookies to the boys." I was the only kid who came back with more money than I left with. And I dreamed about this stuff. But then I did something really dumb. I went and got a job. And I worked in some really cool companies. I worked in Lenovo, Epson, Apple, kind of a cool company, right? I hated it. There was always an excuse, more money, more stock options, but I always wanted to do a startup. I gave it all up 3 years ago, came to Barcelona, and that's what I do now. I have my own startup company. Less money, huge hours, lots of frustration, but the best 3 years of my life being involved with startups. So let's talk about that. Aside from that career, I also run, we're going to talk about this word in a second, I run an incubation park in Barcelona. Yeah? We've had 120 companies, we grew 30% last year, we make profit, and we do that by helping companies get started. The word entrepreneurship, I actually try to avoid, because I hate the word entrepreneur. Entrepreneur. I feel like somebody's going to pull out a banquet of flowers, or doves will fly. And worse, it sounds, I don't know why it's funny in a French accent, entrepreneur, right? But it's just, it's the kind of thing like the word master or expert. If somebody says, "Can you cook?" I'm an expert cook. Are you a good kisser? I'm a master at kissing. Mentally, we think, yeah, right. Same with entrepreneur. And I see 2 kinds of people in the startup world. And the first is the one who says, "I'm an entrepreneur." And there's 3 things about the people who introduce them like that. There's 3 things I'd mention. The first thing, they're very, 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 very good at PowerPoint. Super. And even worse, Slide Rocket. You know that one where it zooms in from, you know, right? And trust me, if you've been out in Barcelona till 3 in the morning, and you have to go to a presentation at 9 where they're using that, I defy you to keep your breakfast inside you, right? The second thing people who say I'm an entrepreneur are really, really good at is surviving, getting funds and loans, and never actually getting into the market. Now, I'm oversimplifying. I'm being very cruel to some people. And the third thing is they're very good dressers. Very cool clothes, right? The second bunch of people that I encounter use a different vernacular. They say, "I'm building a business. I'm starting a business." It's a different language, subtle but different. Yeah? By the way, they are not very good at PowerPoint, but they are very focused on market. They talk about customers. And they're usually very bad dressers, right? But they're the people who go and make a success of it. So what are these things I'm talking about, right, that I think are important? The first thing I think is important is passion. Important as it's a reason to become an entrepreneur, and it's important that you have it as a trait. Picture of a girl with an exploding violin. It kind of says passion. Unfortunately, when you do a Google search on the word passion in Google Images, this is about the most appropriate picture I could put up, right? But she looks passionate. She's got these... Passion, absolutely critical. And people talk about this. Can you imagine if you get your business idea and you really are passionate? What a way to spend your life. The thrill of following your passion, not just doing a job. Now, to make it work, passion should not become an obsession. A lot of entrepreneurs and business people get hung up on the idea. And the idea behind a business is actually pretty useless as a thing. The value of an idea, you know what the value of an idea is? Zero. A lot of entrepreneurs and business people come in and say, what's the value of my idea? It's easy, zero. Well, what if I go and put it in Slide Rocket and I show it to you? What's the value then? That's easy. It's a bigger value. 0 to the power of 10. Your idea only gets valuable when you start to create the business underneath it. That's when it starts to have value. So you need to be ready to build a business and change from your idea when you need to. 66%, they say, of successful startups, which is difficult to say when you have orthodontia as an adult, right? 66% of successful startups that was okay, right? Go on to be successful doing something totally different to what they started with. So what I say is it's great. You can be you can follow your passion. Make sure it doesn't become an obsession on an idea. Focus your passion behind getting your business successful. That's the critical point, right? The next thing I would talk about is creation, right? You get to create something. Wow. Talk about wow factor. Wow. We all are born to create things. We love to create things. They love to take my slide away. Was it copyrighted or something, or did I do it? I'm sure they'll put it back up in a minute, right? So we're all born to create something. I've got 4 kids. I'm Catholic Irish, so we're very busy with things like that, right? And my kids go nuts creating things. Plastic bottles, boxes, we're all children. In a startup, you get to relive your childhood and create something. How wonderful is that? The problem is today that creativity is pretty much beaten out of us. If you've seen the Ken Robinson video, in education, it's beaten out of us. In university, look at the focus on doing, net present value calculations, the marketing and the other stuff. We kind of tend to laugh at it as not as serious, the creation side. And in companies, the same thing. Companies, creatively, it's a risk to be too creative in a company. Companies are also, I believe, killing creativity. In a startup, you get the freedom to do this. How incredible is that? Yeah? Risk. The rush of risk. A lot of people think being in a startup is risky, right? It's no more risky than having a job. Jobs today are not that secure. In a startup, you get to enjoy the thrill of a risk that's kind of calculated and that you're controlling. You don't get that chance otherwise. If it goes wrong, your CV is still going to look pretty good, because as a graduating MBA, you can go to Danone as an assistant manager of something and build step by step, get your Mont Blanc and go to McKinsey and do the same thing. If you go to a startup for 2 years, you're going to have such a broad experience. I've hired hundreds of people. And I love hiring somebody into a big company from a startup because they've done stuff, because they've no choice. So your CV doesn't lose any value. So what's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? But the problem is we're programmed from childhood to get a job. Get a job. And it's hard to break that programming. Because when you tell your parents or your friends, I'm doing a startup, most of them don't understand what your job is. My mother doesn't understand anymore. She has no clue. Right? But you used to have a job, and now you sort of do, and you help here, and you do They don't get it. They don't get it because we've been programmed as a society in a different way. But in a startup, you get to take this risk. And companies, like I said, don't take risks either. Companies are programmed over time, big companies, to not take. It's why startups can break through. Look at the companies that have lost because of not taking. Sony lost the Walkman as a brand to iPod. Kodak going down the tubes, the Kodak moment. And then you've Instagram, which I would argue was taken. And let's talk about Instagram. Was it worth $1 billion? Yes, it was. It was worth it because somebody was willing to pay for it. And it was worth it because at what, $30-something a person? Even as a business, I mean, I use it. They could probably find a way to bilk $30 a year out of me. Why not? And Instagram, if they manage it properly, could have a great business model. Could be the thing that takes over from Kodak, like the iPod took over from the world. Why not? But the point here is a big company hasn't taken that risk, hasn't taken that space. The same with Facebook, the same with lots of other space. That's why startups can still break through, because big companies don't like to take these risks. But I would say get into a startup because risk is fun. What's life without risk? Right? Another reason to join a startup is you're going to make tons of money. Money's going to fall from the sky. Back to our Instagram friends, $1 billion. Well, there's a few sides to the money discussion when it comes to startups. The chances of getting the $1 billion sellout after 2 years is statistically pretty much the same as getting hurt in an airplane crash. And I used to be afraid of airplanes, and I looked up the statistics. And you're statistically likely to be kicked to death by a donkey. Therefore, you can work your way back in that theory to the $1 billion sellout in 2 years is as like, and you don't come out of the door in the morning looking for donkeys, right? So, mountains and mountains of money, no. But, despite the chance to be creative and passionate and all of these other things, you got to keep a business mindset when it comes to money. And the thing about money in a startup, you can make enough money to live. And if you then have a business model, follow that business model through, you will make money. Okay, whether you sell out for billions, that's a downside of the trendiness of entrepreneurship today. People are doing things that aren't products. They're creating things that are so vague that you want to kick them out. And that's when I look at businesses, I look at them and say, right, how are you going to make money from this? Who wants it? Who needs it? And if you think like that, like a traditional business, you'll be able to make money over time. And whether you sell out for 100 million, it doesn't matter. Yes, I believe startups should have an exit strategy early on, but they shouldn't spend all their time on it. If you're not making someone or something that somebody's willing to spend money for, that's where you fall into the risk category. That's where it doesn't make sense anymore. But I would say money is a reason to go into a startup, because if you do it well, and learn and follow the principle, you'll get ahead. People in this room, a lot of MBAs, you have a lot of the tools. Yeah, you have a lot of the tools to go and be successful. You know, they say you should pick a subject or a company as something that you know about. I said, well, you got to be careful with that, because a lot of people like food doesn't mean they're a good cook. A lot of people go into something they think they know about because they were a user once, and they go wrong, and they're too focused on that. You're business people. You can start companies, get the right expertise in, and build them in a solid way. And, yeah, I think a startup can return money to you as much as a job can. The last point is freedom. I believe that working in a startup gives you massive freedom. What do I mean by that? Companies, you don't have any freedom. Not really. Your life is decided for you. It's a stress. I talked to people in my last company. I was stunned last week. 3 people in one country, 1 dead, 1 stroke, 1 heart attack. They're all in their early 30s. Now, there's an image of startups being super stressful. I believe if you're doing what you love, and it's something that you're truly passionate about, and you control it, that's a great feeling, both physically, emotionally. You're much more happy. I'm way more healthy now than I was 3 years ago working in a company, because your life is lived for you. In a startup, you've more responsibility, but you're in control. Studies show what stresses people out the most in companies is not knowing what's going to happen. Right, in a startup, there's a lot of unknowns, but at least you're the one pulling the handles. So I think being in a startup provides huge freedom. Yeah? So finish this up, right? And I say, push the button, do it. What have you got to lose, right? Steve Jobs is very quoted, right? But there's one quote he made that I think is really, really good, which is, the problem today is not that there's not enough startups or people doing startups. The problem is that people aren't sticking with it. And I think that's a very true statement. I think what's happened a little bit is it's become so cool, it's another thing to add to the resume. So, I've got a cousin and a nephew in Ireland going from middle school to high school. They have these transition years. Have you heard of these things? Where they have a year to not really be in the curriculum, but to just get work experience. And he's finding himself. At 14, he's finding himself, right? Yeah, I'm figuring out what I want to do with my life. Okay. Then you go, and then some people don't go to college. They do a bit of backpacking, right? Or they go and they do their undergrad, and then they have their gap year before their master's, because you got to backpack in India and China, right? Yeah. What worries me a little bit about startup companies is that for MBAs and people who are at that stage of education, it's becoming like the cool gap year. It's destroying the rankings of some of the universities because they're not going into high-paying jobs, which drives the rankings up, but people are jumping into it as something cool. I think it's a great way to live your life. Yes, if it goes wrong, you can still get a great job. But I also say strongly, only do it if you can commit to it. You're not doing it as a hobby for a year or two. You're doing it to build a real business. I think that's a critical element of it. And again, the people in this room, this sort of audience, you have so many tools at your disposal. And what can go wrong? We're in the Western world. We're pretty secure here. Your worst case scenario that might happen to you is thousands of times better than probably 2 billion other people in the world today. You're not going to go hungry, you have family, you have friends, and so if it goes drastically wrong, you have so many options. So what's the worst that can happen? So my closing thought is that there's a lot of great reasons to go and do a startup. Make sure you do it keeping some fundamentals in mind, because it's cool, but it's still a business. But then do it. You get one life. It's an adventure. Nothing is better than going and doing and pursuing a startup, in my opinion. So thank you all very much for listening to my lunacy. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.